Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Custom channel. Today we have another OWC interview with a player from Team Australia, Kano.
A player
Kano,
from Team Australia? Are you crazy? It's a commentator, obviously. He's not a player.
Oof. But you didn't tell me anything
Good start.
Before this.
Great, okay.
First we were doing a UK, then it changed. It's 6 a.m. for me. Have not slept. This is what you get for throwing me in this, Sartin.
It's alright. Commentators and players are basically the same thing anyway.
Yeah, irrelevant anyway.
Australian dude.
Okay. Hey guys, we're live with this new podcast with Kano. I'm saying that correctly. At least we didn't screw that up. Hey there. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, no, I'm doing good. Hope you're doing well.
We are very much nervous about this very professional podcast we have just started very badly. So yeah. Nah, it's all good. Bloopers! Oh my god. Anyway, let's just get on with the actual questions then. You take it off, Donald.
All right, well, the first question we like to ask all of our new guests on the podcast is, who are you and what is your OSU history? How did you get involved in the game? Where were your beginnings in OSU?
Well, I've gone by the name of Kano pretty much for the entire time. I've had a brief name change from a similar name, which used to be Kano Mac, but a long time ago, an old streamer friend of mine, about 4 years ago, I think, got me into the game. I actually started playing the game, and then I took a bit of time away from it, and then some closer friends who I used to play games with got me back into it. But yeah, most people know of me as an OS streamer, so yeah, I've pretty much just been doing that for the last 4 years. Like, ever since I first got into the game, I pretty much started streaming it, so that's just mostly what I'm known for.
So like a 6-digit streamer, really?
I think back then it was like 5-digit streamer, because that was back on PPV1, and there was also a lot less players 4 to 5 years ago.
I see. And your viewer base since has grown a lot. We can definitely tell that, at least. Is that mainly because of OSU, or did you also play like other games on stream that like boosted your follower count, or what really made you like popular in the community over here?
Originally, I was known for playing League of Legends, but I guess like it wasn't something that blew up. Like, it was one of those things where I had like maybe, you know, a handful of friends watching me or something like that, and then eventually I just basically took OS full time. And from that point, yeah, that just kind of grew my channel. I got to know more people in the community, other streamers, you know, other viewers, just basically networked a lot on Twitch, and here I am now, kind of thing.
Alright, cool. So yeah, as in the previous few podcasts, this podcast is going to be themed around the OWC. This is the first time we're actually having a commentator on the stream talking about his experiences so far, and you know, we want to get to know you a little better, as in how you got into here. So have you played in the OWC before, or maybe commentated in it before, or is this like your first time as well?
This is all entirely brand new to me. I've never commentated the OWC before. I have commentated in some community tournaments, like a few small community tournaments. I think I did it in Yaz Cup. I've done one of the United States finals. I also did a little bit for the I think the Chinese winter tournament, OCWT, if I recall correctly. But yeah, that's pretty much my experiences so far. I've come kind of close to being able to play in the Australian team, but not quite. I'm always falling short in terms of consistency, but I'm working on that a lot more. So who knows? Maybe you'll see Kano in Team Australia 2018.
Maybe one day, yeah, hopefully. How long have you been commentating OSU for then, like tournament director's commentary, that is?
It actually hasn't been too long. I'm not sure exactly how I got into it. I can't remember if I was approached by someone or if I wanted to get into it. I think it was just like, I had a close friend of mine who I spoke to, OMG4s, or yeah, that's I guess that's how you say his name. But yeah,
close friend it is, yeah.
very close friend. Nah, it's just, I don't know, he has one of those names which is hard to say. I don't even think he knows how to say it, but Fours got me into casting pretty much. Like, he helped kind of guide me through the steps and how to go about doing it. So yeah, and then I saw that he casted OWC, and yeah, that was pretty much it, really. Like, I got a lot of tips and advice from him. He got me into doing some of the smaller tournaments, and then yeah, it kind of just went from there.
Ah, interesting. So, how were you initially approached to commentate No WC? Like, who reached out to you, and what was that experience like?
So the OWC, like me being approached for this was kind of weird because I know Fours. Fours casted the previous OWC. He casted 2016. I don't think he did 2015 if I recall correctly, but yeah, he casted 2016, and then there was also a couple of the I think OS staff members. I think like Deadbeat in particular, Ephemeral, for example. They came across my stream, and I guess they from seeing what my stream is like, they know that I have a very good confident sounding talking voice. So it's one of those things where they think that I'd be appropriate for shoutcasting. And this was all around the same time that I was also getting into the community tournaments and all that kind of stuff. So Fours was basically talking about it being a possibility that I could maybe cast at WC, like he'd put in a good word for me and all that kind of stuff. And but the other thing as well is that the trade-off was that I had to get some experience prior to it. So that was where I decided to get into casting some of the smaller tournaments in particular as well, just so I could get some experience, so I know exactly like how to go about doing this, like how to commentate realistically.
So it was kind of a right place, right time for you.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's just one of those things like, streaming, and then obviously having a couple of friends who, are working in that little area kind of helped out, especially. So having them reach out to me, and just like, it was more that they reached out to me in terms of gaining interest rather than a guaranteed spot. But I think that based on the fact that I got experiences, and then, they kind of like do reviews based on who they think should be picked for the casting. So that was kind of where it led to.
All right, very cool. But luckily you got these spots. You do indeed sound very confident in your speech, and I like that a lot in commentators. So yeah, more over your skill sets for commentary. Like, what do you feel is unique about you in specific to commentary? And are there like any kind of techniques that you use whilst doing that, that you could maybe like recommend other people to use as well?
In terms of my commentary and uniqueness, it's really hard to say that there's anything unique specifically besides like the voice and the accent or something. But as for the techniques, it's mostly just that you try your best to focus on for me specifically, I try my best to focus on not overhyping certain things but not underhyping other things. So basically like choosing what is important in order of preference, basically. So if you find, a player who should easily full combo a drum and bass map, you don't really overhype something like that if they get like a low unstable rate on it or a high accuracy on that kind of thing. It's just one of those things that's kind of expected. Whereas if you see someone full combo like a technical map with a whole bunch of wob sliders all over the place and really, really tricky patterns, then that's one of the things that you would hype up a lot more, and you'd be a lot more excited and, over-exaggerating more so.
I see. And are those like things you picked up whilst doing those small tournaments you talked about earlier on, or is that something you did from the get-go whilst you started with commentary?
Luckily enough, I had Fours kind of explain like a few techniques that he uses in his casts, for example. Another thing as well is that I try my best to avoid talking down on players. Sometimes I may say that players are weak in certain areas, like let's say you have a double time player who might not be comfortable on low approach rate hidden, for example. That's one of the things that I might, so to speak, talk down a player on, but it's not really like saying, hey, this player is bad. It's more a case of saying like, this is something that they're uncomfortable with, and this is something that you have to be looking out for when you're casting.
Just good player information, like you have your facts checked all over the place. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. And as you mentioned before, as we mentioned before, you're well known for being a streamer beforehand on your Twitch channel. So do you feel as if streaming prior hand has helped you with the way you've commentated?
Definitely. I would definitely have to say that's the case, because when it came to streaming, back when I started 4 or 5 years ago, it's like somewhere between that amount. I mean, technically I have like my 4-year stream anniversary coming up soon, but that's only since I've had my name changed, because I don't actually have the stats but of when I started streaming actively. But when I first started streaming, I wasn't really someone who interacted with chat very often. I was kind of just that person that like sat there, played the game. I might like occasionally talk to people, or I might type to people.
Streamer, really.
Yeah. I mean, back then I think I even used push to talk because I was too like concerned about background noise and just like having my mic turned on all the time. So what I ended up doing was just over time I streamed for a very long period. I got to know more people. Socializing became a little bit easier. And then again, like, it's one of those things where just as you stream more and more, you build up the confidence that you need. And that's one of the things that I would have to say that really helped me a lot more with commentary when it comes to streaming. It's just the confidence and being able to talk.
All right. So as you're now, well, experienced, actually, like really experienced at this point, what are like a few tips that you would like to give to, for example, maybe some people watching the stream currently that might also want to get into casting OWC, which is, I would say, pretty difficult, honestly, and what would actually, you know, make it a little bit easier for them to get started, like what they should be doing and where they should be looking? Like, are there any tips you could give those players?
Now, I'm going to say two things here, which are probably going to go against each other, but I would say the first piece of advice that I would give is not to overthink it. Overthinking it is really bad because what ends up happening is that sometimes you might have a few sentences coming up in your head which may sound good in your head at the time, but when it comes to actually saying it out loud, it doesn't really work or like flow off the tongue very well. Another thing I would have to say is to just try and be as confident as possible. You know, like practice, you know, a few phrases in your head which you can commonly get to know. And then besides that, I'd have to say just, you know, research the players, research tournaments, also watch tournaments as well. Like watching tournaments can help you a lot with seeing how other players cast. Like let's say you're watching a community tournament and you don't like a caster, but you like a certain other caster. If you see something that you don't like about a caster, you can kind of use that as a way to expand on that. So if you don't like something that they're doing, you should feel as if you can do it differently or better or something like that. Or if you like a way that someone else casts, you can kind of pick up on little things that they do in order to help your casting. So it's just one of those things where it's more like a reflection process rather than you know, yeah. Just I can't really think of it. Yeah, pretty much just like improving.
Yeah, right. Makes a lot of sense, obviously. Did you watch a lot of these stream interviews? What am I talking about? Stream tournaments before you got started with your own commentary as well, or did you just kind of wing it?
Yeah, I would have to say I watched a fair few tournaments prior to actually casting it myself. Obviously having fours kind of guide me, helped me a lot, but for the most part, yeah, I watched a lot of tournaments prior to this.
Since
like watching
OWC fours. What a champ.
Do you ever look back on your past recordings to see if you made any mistakes and whatnot?
When it comes to mistakes, I usually try to pinpoint them on the spot. It's something that I've always done. It comes in the same thing. Like it's just a natural habit for me when it comes to video games as well. Like if I make a mistake in a game, I try and pinpoint it right there on the spot and remind myself not to do that mistake. Like it was mostly something that applied to me in League of Legends when I really cared about the game. But yeah, it's always been something that I do with commentary. As for looking back on VODs, I mean, sometimes I might rewatch a VOD to see if I'm speaking clearly or something like that. But for the most part, I do a lot of reflection on the spot. And sometimes the reflection that I mostly do might be when I talk to another caster. So we'll have a discussion. It's usually something that happens with fours very often because we like to help each other. Like if he explains something, then I explain something that he could have improved on and vice versa. Like we just give each other advice based on the casts. And,
Another quick
I was just going to say, I want to quickly do this with
Go ahead.
more other casters if possible. It's just,
go ahead.
For the most part, because I know him a lot closer, it's a bit easier for me to do it with him, but definitely looking to expand on that.
And that's actually what I was going to touch on. You just kind of brought it up. You know, one thing that's kind of important when casting is the person you cast with and knowing that person as well.
Yeah.
And me and Sartin have talked about this multiple times. I know in OWC it's a little different. You guys, I think, commentate in pods of threes in the past that you have. What do you feel is the right number for a commentary crew?
The right size.
The right size.
It's really, really hard because a lot of people see 2 as perfectly fine. I see 2 as perfectly fine. I don't really think there's necessarily a right size, but I think maybe based on the importance of the event, like you could run 2 casters pretty much all the time for everything, and then maybe for a finals you could have 3. Because at the end of the day, if you have 3 really, really good casters who can work really well together, it makes a much more interesting cast, just seeing all the different points of views and things that people can bring up and talk about. Because, I mean, when you take let's take some of the casters from the OWC this year so far. You have myself, you have Fours, you have Doomsday, you have Evrian. We're all slightly different in the way that we cast. It's very slight differences, but you know, you have
what would
like
those
the hype
differences
caster.
be then, for example, if you could list any of them?
I would have to say that I'm someone who kind of has like all-round commentary, but it's just like okay all-round commentary. Fours is someone who's very good at explaining things to do with maps in particular. Evrian is someone who's really good at usually explaining the players, especially if he's done his research. Like he usually does that kind of stuff. And Dooms is more of your, you know, really, really calm, casual, laid-back caster, someone that you enjoy listening to, but he's also really hyped up when the right time comes. So you have those kinds of different casters, and they all gel together in a certain way.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Just as long as there's like a certain level of symbiosis, you could say it works out with any kind of amount of players casting, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. Well, that was for like the commentary aspect of OWC. We've got to learn a lot of you about you on that topic, but obviously we wonder what you think of the tournament itself as well. So here's a few questions on that. Starting off with, who are your favorite teams? As in, like, not strongest teams in your vision, but more like, who do you cheer for whenever the match ongoing?
I would have to say that. No bias whatsoever, but Team Australia, despite being knocked out. No bias. But in all honesty, out of the teams that are still there, I'd have to say Hong Kong. Actually, it's quite a surprise or a bit of a shock for some people, but I just rate them so highly. They seem like such an underdog team when it comes to the seed that they get, but the actual players themselves, they are really, really scary.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Definitely, it's also it's also kind of similar thing that I noticed in catch. Like Hong Kong, they just seem to be a bunch of people that they're not into PP farming, so they don't really get like a high seed, but they are a very dangerous team.
Yeah, because they beat the Netherlands like twice now. Is that some sign you're trying to give me, Donald?
No, but hey, I mean, you said it, not me.
No, true. Like, as far as I remember, they played versus the Netherlands like yesterday. I think it was Hong Kong, and they Netherlands lost 64, and in CWC we did the exact same thing in semi-finals. We actually played versus Hong Kong as well, lost 63. Feels bad, but yeah, Hong Kong being one of the underdogs. How far do you think they'll come into the tournament? Actually, Kano. I almost mispronounced that.
I honestly don't know, because there are just so many good teams this year in comparison to the previous years. I mean, there's still been a lot of good teams in the previous years, and some teams we've seen fall off a little bit because some of the greater players are sort of stepping down or taking breaks or something like that. But even then, with those players still stepping down, you still have so many strong lineups. But Team UK is someone who has, you know, they've stepped up so much this year. I honestly think that it's probably going to be United Kingdom versus United States in the finals. But I'd have to say that Hong Kong probably have a place maybe in the semi-finals, if not quarterfinals for sure.
Do you think that they'll be able to make it to finals week through the losers bracket at all?
I think so. I would have to say that they should be able to make it to at least the quarterfinals, semi-finals. That's just my expectation for them throughout the whole tournament. I can see them potentially being anywhere from a 3rd to 8th team.
So, other than Hong Kong, you know, it's good to point out like teams like that. Are there any other teams that you're kind of keeping an eye on? Any other like underdog teams that you've seen as far as you analyzing the tournament?
I don't really know, because I haven't had that much of a chance to do a lot of research on the players. I have been keeping an eye on some of the underdog teams. Like I've seen that Denmark made it through, which was quite a surprise just by their group, because I think they were one of the lower seed teams. But yeah, I haven't really been paying too much attention as for some of the underdog teams coming in.
Yeah, and to be honest, there haven't been too many. There were 3 low seed teams that did advance. It was Hong Kong, Netherlands, and Denmark, I believe, were the 3 low seeds.
That's right. Yeah, Netherlands was the other one.
Yeah,
I do
remember
them.
Yeah, Hong Kong. Yeah, that was an interesting group. What do you think about Team Brazil? I'm just curious to see what you think about them, because they had a really stellar performance in their group.
I think they are powerhouses. Honestly, Mouse Easy is hands down one of the most craziest and consistent players, especially both in terms of like comboing maps and getting good accuracy on maps. Like you're pretty much probably going to see 100% accuracy coming in like on any map that requires aim.
And then there's Fabricio.
Yeah,
He also had a stellar group stage.
They have such a strong lineup. They are definitely one that I can see probably making it to semifinals, if not finals. Like it's so hard to determine the future when it comes to these teams because there's just so many powerhouses out there. It's insane.
It's true. I think we kind of already segued into our next question kind of by talking about the teams, but next question was who are your favorite teams? Not necessarily in strength, but just teams that you like. Think will do well.
Oh,
that you're hoping for.
I think I was gonna say we touched on that already.
Yeah. That was. I think that was the next question, but we'd already started on it. Yeah. I kind of missed that, but I think you've already said Team Australia is what you're sticking with it.
I would have to say Team Australia
and Hong Kong. Yeah,
they're definitely.
And Hong Kong, yeah.
They're definitely because Hong Kong's obviously still in the tournament.
Yeah.
Australia not so much, sadly.
No
bias.
poor thing. Yeah.
Oh.
Too bad. But yeah, maybe next year, whenever you join them, right? You made a promise now.
Hopefully.
Oh man.
So about your casting then again. Sorry for coming back to it. Well, actually, you love talking about casting, don't you? You should be loving it, right? Yeah. Do you feel?
I mean, I don't mind.
Nah, doesn't mind. Like, there's a few commentators, obviously, that are actually playing in the tournament itself as well as commentating, such as Doomsday and Happy Stick. You obviously don't, since you just said you didn't make it into the Australian team. So I wonder, do you feel less involved or less hyped and, just informed with the entire OWC due to you not playing in it? Or do you feel just as, into it like the rest of the commentators that are also playing at the same time?
So this is a pretty interesting question. It's like yes and no, because I think that the only way that I'm not informed with the OWC, despite not being a player, would have to be that I don't really get much of an opportunity to see how teams think and what their strategies are. However, this is something that I also try to incorporate into my casts. I try my best to sort of explain what my thought process is behind how teams would approach their opponents, the map pools, all that kind of stuff. Basically saying like what my predictions are for bans, picks, things like that. What players are most likely going to come in, talking about the strengths and weaknesses of those players. Like, if you have a team that has like a full DT roster, what kind of things are you going to expect from them? It's obviously that you're going to expect the opposing team to ban something double time, and you're going to expect them to pick the other double time pick if possible. And then if there isn't that double time option, then you have to look at the rest of the map pool, analyze that, and then see, hey, is there something that's similar to something that double time players would be comfortable on? Let's say like a higher approach rate pick, which is still high BPM. There's just things like that to take into consideration. And then obviously you have, if a double time team is going to ban something, it's most likely going to be something that most double time players don't like playing. So which in that case, it's usually a lower approach rate. So they would ban something like the, AR8 hidden pick, or just something that might be a bit hard to read. But so, that's pretty much the thing, because I don't get a chance to really hear much of the strategies that teams talk about, like what they do. Some teams might not even have strategies. They might just go into it thinking like, completely confident. Sometimes teams might even play mind games. You might have a team which is a bunch of DT players, but they don't opt to ban the AR8 hidden pick. Instead, they pick it because, the mind games could be that they've practiced the map.
Yeah, just to throw off the other team, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, mind games are something that we've seen in plenty of tournaments across all different games. It's not just something that happens in OS. It happens pretty much all the time in everything.
I mean, if you want to be more informed on the teams, right? Like, there's a funny podcast called Fruit for Thought. You're like in the podcast as well. We do interview teams as well, so you might want to check those out sometime.
I was gonna say I know that obviously there's looking at that. That's part of the research thing that I also do. Like, I try my best to research the players, research the maps and the pools and all that kind of stuff. I actually have had a chance to kind of listen in on the Australian team, at least, because obviously I know them fairly well. Like, they most teams from what I've actually seen also have like an open OWC Discord. For most I've seen, there's like been links to it, like, hey, like join our Discord server, we talk about OWC stuff. It's not necessarily that they reveal strategies, but you have a chance to at least like talk to some of the players. But I did that for the Australian team, and I can kind of, I was playing with some of them in multi prior to their match, because I know most of them fairly well. And I was talking about some of the strategies going into the next game and basically saying like, hey, I think you guys should do this and all that kind of stuff. And then they were talking about their thought process behind it.
That's
so
very
I
interesting.
get a little bit of information, but it's just, it's very limited, but at the same time, it's something that you can also brainstorm in your head yourself, in my opinion.
Yeah, it makes it more interesting, maybe even because imagine if you were proven incorrect with your assumptions on what a team would do. I mean, that would always make for something interesting to watch as well, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, I like just putting my thoughts out on the table, and whether or not those thoughts are correct, that's something that will be determined by the match and the games themselves and the players.
Definitely. It's something that, a lot of people look forward to as well, You gotta kind of hype it up and just put your opinions out there. And speaking of your opinions, one big part of every OWC tournament is the map pool. What did you think of this weekend's round of 16 map pool?
I don't know if you want my thoughts on this.
Now we do.
Go.
Yes.
No. I'll be fairly honest about this. It's I think that they've gone with the right approach in terms of the difficulty spike that they've gone for. I really like the difficulty spike in terms of, pretty much all the picks across the board. I just don't think that there's enough diversity in the pool. From what I've seen, a lot of the no mod is very heavily emphasized on aim. There are still some technical picks and stuff like that, but again, it's very heavily emphasized on aim. You have the tiebreaker in particular. I think that's the thing that most people are very, very, very disappointed about, both the players and even the people watching from the sidelines. The tiebreaker is something that most people just don't enjoy because of the fact that it's fairly aim focused. And at the end of the day, like, I guess that is kind of mostly a consistency pick, but I think that when you're picking a tiebreaker, your thought process needs to be something that has a fair bit of balance. Like, you need to have a decent amount of streams, a decent amount of a decent amount of jumps, a few technical parts if possible, like trying to keep that balance on the tiebreaker. It's something that you should kind of have, which you have across the whole entire pool in a single map. And I know that's really, really hard to pick sometimes, but I think that they've just gone the wrong approach with that version of Virgin Code especially.
I definitely have to agree there.
Yeah, that will probably, that leads us into the next question quite nicely. Actually, you just touched upon it as well. But then, if you were to be the map pooler, then what would you personally change into these map pools for like the upcoming few rounds? What kind of maps would you add? Yeah,
I would definitely like to see a little bit more diversity. I think that the diversity that they have now is still pretty okay for the most part. Like, throughout the rest of the map pool, besides the tiebreaker, there's a fair decent amount of diversity. It's just that, again, it's still very heavily emphasized on aim, and obviously that's something that's bound to happen no matter what as the pool increases with difficulty. It's just that it's so much more noticeable in comparison to the previous pool, and something that I would probably change. I guess there's a couple of maps that come to mind when it comes to tiebreakers and stuff like that, but it's really hard to pick the next pool. It's one of those things where I would replace the current tiebreaker with something else that I can think of in my head. I think it's the Heaven's Race guitar style or something like that by Moth. There's a really, really nice difficulty of that, which has a whole bunch of technical streams, a bit of aim, a bit of everything really. It pretty much challenges like you as a player, and I feel like that is a lot better of a tiebreaker in comparison to what we have now. But I don't really know. I would have to say, just making sure that you emphasize more on the type of picks that you opt for. So if you're opting for something technical, try to focus more on the technical aspect and less on the aim aspect. I think that they've still gone with a pretty good approach on Probox's map. It's just that, it's still very, very aimy. As for some of the older maps, I think they've done a pretty good job on that. And especially the Area Hidden, they did a really, really solid job on that. I think it's going to be very hard to top that one next week, though. Without going too far over the board, I think the Area Hidden picks are just going to be the ones that you'll probably see banned in almost every single tournament.
For some reason, people just don't like them. I don't know why.
They make for interesting upsets. That's the one thing that's always cool about AR8. That
true.
one scenario where it doesn't get banned. It's always like a spooky situation then because you don't know if they're gonna pick it, but if they do, it's like, oh, there we go.
It's like,
good fun.
AR8 hidden, now what? Yeah.
And
we're going to transition into one of my favorite questions to ask everyone, and it's something I'm kind of eager to know from each and every person we have on the podcast. You kind of alluded to your thoughts on this already earlier, but who do you think will be this year's top 3?
Ooh.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
And this is a tough one. Take your
It
time.
really is.
This is really tough. I have like a few favorites and then I have a few expectations. So I'd have to say right now, with where the countries are standing and based on their current performances throughout group stages and round of 16. I mean, obviously we still have 4 matches to go, but I would have to say that the United States, we're bound to see them in the finals once again. I think that the second contender is probably going to be the UK. And then as for the further on, it's probably going to be either Brazil, maybe again, like you have so many powerhouse teams which could take a third place. You have Poland, you have Austria, you have Norway, Brazil, South Korea have a really, really solid lineup. Again, as I mentioned, Hong Kong are quite underdogs. You've seen Russia's lineup be very strong as well. They've proven to be really strong.
That's a
I would have to
big
say,
top 3. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, again, like I'm pretty solid on UK and United States final, but picking the third team is pretty much the impossible thing for me. I would have to say Brazil in terms of how they've been performing so far.
I definitely do like them as like a dark horse pick.
Yeah, as for the team that I can actually see making it really far, depending on the map pools, this is something that is really, really heavily dependent on the map pools. I can actually see South Korea making it third, just because they have so many iconic players who can full combo crazy maps, and that's I think it's mostly coming from Prey and Pring, the two players. They have really. They're very well known for their insane plays, like pretty much full comboing anything, but they tend to have very low accuracy. That's the only downfall of them. But again, when the map pool gets harder and harder, like for example, I think we saw Furioso in the map pool for the finals as just an example. I can't remember which year that was. I think it was either 2015 or 2016. Yeah, 2015. We had that in the finals. I would have to say those kinds of players would perform crazy on something like that. Like just an outstanding pick. And if you can get them to that point, like if South Korea can make it to that point, they have so many players that will just, dominate on that.
I mean, that was a pretty popular opinion. South Korea to be third. I've heard that a lot in the previous few podcasts that we have done.
I think we've had a few people even predict them to win.
Like a few, yeah, like a few. Most of the people still said America in the end, but I mean, there's very diverse opinions on this topic, and I really like it. So, again, maybe I should make a list on it and put down the top 3 of all of these people that have been in the podcast already. But you know me,
I would have to say my like based on current performances, definitely US, UK, and Brazil. But then based on whether or not the map pool changes and gets significantly harder, not necessarily in terms of aim, but in terms of like technical difficulty and all that kind of stuff as well, I would have to say South Korea is probably going to be a third place team.
I mean, South Korea though definitely didn't start their knockout stage optimally with that loss to Taiwan.
Yeah. No, I saw that, but despite that, I think it's one of the things.
Yeah, and there's another team, Taiwan, a team that just always seems to be there, but just can't seem to really find that push to make it through. But they're definitely a solid team, and I think, like you said earlier, it's really exciting when you see all these teams that you can make arguments for. They have really strong lineups and good players, so it should be an interesting World Cup nonetheless.
Yeah, Taiwan is definitely one of those teams which can pretty much perform very solidly overall, no matter what. And I mean, you may even see them perform exceptionally well on map pools which get harder and harder. But I just think that if South Korea can manage to like slowly but surely grind their way through, and just like even if they only just skim through a couple victories to get to the group final, semi-final stages, I think that's where they're going to excel, just because the map pools by that time should be significantly harder and something that's more up their alley. Because I have seen a few of them have been enjoying the map pools, at least from the feedbacks. But yeah.
So it's kind of holding out for them and then hoping for the best.
Because that's the thing. They have... I wouldn't necessarily say they have a weak lineup in terms of getting through the early game, but Young is one of the players, and obviously Firebat as well. They're 2 players who can kind of carry them through the early game, providing they remain consistent. Obviously, we've seen a couple of the other South Korean players be really, really consistent. Like Neta, for example, was an old timer who's played pretty much, all the OWCs that I can remember. And with the new addition of Prey and Pring, like those pretty much are the 2 that are hoping to get them through the late game as well, just to be able to maintain those full combos. And accuracy obviously is one of those things you throw out the window when the maps get hard enough where misses can occur anywhere.
Yeah, definitely something you can really kind of forego. It's just about surviving the map at that point with a full combo. Definitely kind of supersedes anything, even if you get an A on the map at that point. One last thing, really quickly, I just kind of want to get your opinion on this or your guess. We have 4 matches left to be played in the round of 16 coming up today, or today, technically today. Yeah. So I'm just curious to get your like predictions for these 4 matches. So.
Do you want score predictions as well?
I mean, you can go for it if you want. Yeah, the guru here.
Remember what we did with CWC and the podcast took like an hour and a half? Here we go.
So wait, hold on. These are
it's only 4.
11s, right?
It's only 4.
Yeah, these are best of 11s, right? So
yeah, it's first and 6. Yeah, best of 11. So,
okay, so
Poland versus Austria.
Oh my goodness. That one is a hard one because both of those teams are teams which can really, really show up at any time. Like you just never know. They're so unpredictable in how they're based, how they're going to play. Austria has a really, really solid lineup, and it's been seen. Obviously, Goose is one of those players that is just outstanding. Poland has so many strong players. Obviously, you have Wolf, you have Rafis, countless amounts of other players out there. Like, it's so hard, man. I would have to say probably 6-4 in favor of Poland.
Interesting. Yeah.
Then we have Denmark, Germany. What about that?
Yeah.
Denmark, Germany. Based on Germany's performance in the group stages, I think that was just one of those things where the map pool wasn't quite really suited to them, and still fairly simplistic. But with the map pool being a little bit harder, I would have to say that Germany might have the upper hand and probably take that one 6-2.
And then we have Canada, Brazil.
Oh boy, Canada, Brazil. Oh man, this is really hard because Canada have so many good players, and Brazil, again, we've been talking about them. They have so many good players.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, Canada has a really, really good accuracy lineup overall, like across the entire board. They have so many players who are very heavily focused on accuracy. And not only that, they also have really good tech players. It's so tricky to say, because based on this map pool, it's heavily focused on aim. And I've seen that some of the Canadian players, a few posts have said that, some of them are getting nervous. A few of them have had their first OWC. I think it was Identical or Ignite or someone like that. One of those players is having their first OWC. So it makes sense for them to be fairly nervous. But I would have to say that one's probably going to go to Brazil 6-3.
Then last up, maybe the easiest one, we don't know. Norway versus the United States, your favorite for this tournament. Who do you think is going to take this early round win?
I don't know. I know, like, it's
darn.
it's I never know, man. Despite the United States being my favorite, again, these are only the round of 16 map pools. These are things where upsets are caused. Like upsets can happen so easily.
We did see the U.S. struggle just like a tad bit in the group stage. The map pools easier.
I actually found out that a couple of those issues were caused by technical difficulties more than anything, because I think Toy mentioned in one of the maps. Actually, no, I think they won that map. But yeah, Toy mentioned in one of the maps his cursor froze up, and because he mentioned that he went back and watched the VOD of when I was casting, and this is one of those things which I actually used as a piece of advice on reflection for my casting. He mentioned that 8 misses on that map. Like I go back and look at the previous results. That's something that I also like to do. I look at the previous results from previous matches in the group stages, and it was something that I talked about. I said that Toy was struggling on Fairy Ring, which was the hard rock pick, because he had an 8 miss on that, but that 8 miss was caused by his pen freezing up, basically. Like his pen froze up apparently, and he mentioned that to me, but he said that he's glad that I used the past results as a way to implement that into my casting. But at the same time, this is also something that I've taken in my head. I'm like, oh, maybe that's, maybe it was a technical difficulty. Like I have to kind of incorporate that into my cast and like take that into consideration.
True.
Oh, does this player just struggle with this kind of map, or could it have been like something else? Like it just seems very uncharacteristic for that kind of miss to occur. So
your pick?
Yeah, for United States and Norway, I would have to say that could be a 6-3, but in favor of the United States. So I think for the first one, it's going to be 6-4 in favor of Poland, 6-2 in favor of Germany, 6-3 in favor of Brazil, and then 6-3 in favor of the United States. I can see Norway picking.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any sweeps on this kind of pool. I think in the next few pools we'll probably see some sweeps depending on what happens.
Interesting.
All right, very cool. All right, but I think we'll round it up then. Kano, oh my god, it's the end and I mispronounced it.
Kano.
Hello, Kano. I want to thank you very much for being here. It was very interesting to talk to you about all your stuff. Here's a few links to all of Kano's stuff. His Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, so go and check him out, guys. Definitely deserves a little bit of love coming from you. So I hope you enjoyed it, and
Hit him up.
good luck with all the casting, the upcoming casting. You are up in like 3 hours as well, or 2 hours for like the next match, as far as I remember. So yeah.
Yeah, about 3 hours. But yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on here as well. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
And yeah,
With
take
love.
it easy.
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
always
guys.
awesome to hear a caster's point of view. So
The casters are the most amazing people on this planet. I'll tell you that much. So
I
guys,
think you're just saying that because we cast.
yeah. Maybe.
Ah.
But yeah, guys, thank you for watching as well. This VOD will be watchable on YouTube as well, so you can link it to all your friends so they can check out Kano's stuff. And hopefully, up until next time, we'll be back with more Food for Thought, more people in the OWC.
Hey.
It's going to be very interesting, always. Hey, take care, guys. Have a good day or a good night. Bye-bye.
And don't drop your fruit.